Hey sisters, welcome back to another episode of Blemished. My name is Frances Cantu and this is my channel Wife Stuff, and here on this series I share with y'all just how blemished I am, but that we serve an unblemished God. Alright, today's episode is going to be more on the serious side. This is going to be the story of my pregnancy loss and how it led me to the moment that I realized that I needed a savior. Well, to give some context, my pregnancies were never pregnancies that were easy. I mean, I don't know whose pregnancy is easy, but what I mean by that is I would always have bleeding throughout my pregnancies. With my daughter, my firstborn, I had bleeding all the way until like the 3rd month. My first trimester I bled, and then with my son also I bled throughout the first 3 months. Well, so it was no news to me of me bleeding throughout my pregnancies. I was told when I had my daughter I had to have her by C-section. She was an emergency C-section, and I was told then that I had a Bicornia Uterus. Well, I didn't even know what that meant, but I went and looked it up, and basically it is just that my uterus is not in a shape like this. It's more of a heart. And so my daughter was only growing in one section of my uterus, so just on the one area. So she wasn't very big. She was a tiny little baby, and at one point they even told me after I had her, they asked if she was a preemie, and I said no, I've carried her to full term, because she was so small. She was 5 pounds and 9 ounces, and so they just thought that she might have been a preemie. Well, I actually ended up having to buy her preemie clothes, which was so funny. So she was essentially a preemie. But anyways, so I had bleeding throughout my pregnancies. I knew that this was a common thing with me. They never actually figured out where the source of the bleeding would come from. It would just develop, and shortly after the 3 months, it would usually subside. The baby would grow big enough that my uterus, the baby would expand so much that there would not be able to be a collection of blood. What they had assumed was happening is that on the other side of my uterus, blood was collecting, and it didn't have at that time anywhere to go but out. Still to this day, I don't know for a fact. We don't know exactly what the problem was. But fast forward, I'm pregnant with my husband and I's daughter, and I'm about 5 months pregnant. Well, I'm at work, and like I said, no new news. It was normal for me to bleed, so I never really considered or thought anything of it. I did remember going to the restroom, asking if I could go to the restroom, because at that time you had to be relieved and stuff like that. So somebody else had to come in the job that I worked at. Well, so I got somebody to come sit for me, and I ended up going to the restroom. Well, of course, I was bleeding. Well, the bleeding kind of got a little bit heavier, so I did have a little bit of concerns in the back of my mind, like, okay, something maybe isn't right. So I ended up going and talking to my boss, and she said, no, go home. So I ended up coming home. I called my nurse, who was on, working with me and stuff. And she finally got back to me, and she said, just go take some Tylenol, put your feet up, just relax, ease your mind. Later that day, my stomach just continued to hurt. I started at that point having some cramping and stuff like that. Well, I still was kind of like, okay, probably it's nothing. I mean, you're pregnant, that there's pain and there's ligament pain and there's things that come along with pregnancy. So I still at that point did not think anything was wrong. Later that night, I just became more and more in pain, and I would have these pains, these sharp pains, and then they would subside. And so at that point I started to think maybe I was having contractions. But I had never experienced contractions because with all of my children I had had C-sections. So I had never officially gone into labor. I had never experienced labor. I didn't know what to expect outside of, what I've seen on the movies. I ended up telling my husband, my boyfriend at the time, I said, I think we need to go to the hospital. So we ended up going to the hospital. They checked me out. Well, the town that I live in, they do not have an OBGYN department. So he referred me to go to a couple towns over where I would actually have delivered, where you deliver. That's where the OBGs are located. So I went over there to their hospital, and they hooked me up to the monitors and everything. And they said, well, you're not having contractions. I'm not sure what you were feeling. I don't know. So we're going to give you some more Tylenol. We're going to keep you, here overnight. And then if nothing's happened, then tomorrow we will send you home. So my doctor ended up coming in. They gave me an ultrasound. And he said, well, it still looks like there's blood, there's still fluid, but everything, baby looks fine, everybody looks good, you're good to go. So they ended up sending me home. I came home, I had permission to be off of work, so that next day I was here, and I was just started to feel this pain all over again. And so I was like, I at first ignored it. Well, then little by little, it just got worse and worse. And so then I called my nurse again. She said, go take a bath, go relax. If you do want to come in, then you can. But she didn't seem concerned. So because her fear or her level of anxiety about the situation wasn't up, they knew my history. I trusted them. And I said, okay, so I took a bath. I ended up calling one of my friends, though, who her sister was actually working for an OBGYN department. And so I was just like, hey, what do contractions feel like? All of this, because I'd never experienced it. And she said, well, she was explaining, it'll feel like this, and then it'll subside. And so then I started to think, okay, maybe I am having contractions, but the pain was getting worse. But I still, in the back of my mind, was like, no, that this isn't labor. This is, I'm okay. Also to note, I have a very high pain tolerance. So I'm used to kind of living and suffering in a certain level of pain. And when it comes to pain, I'm usually like, I just tune it out. When I had my daughter and they gave me my epidural, I remember leaning over, and the nurse comes and, holds you while the anesthesiologist admits the medicine. Well, I was leaned over and I was being just still as could be. And she looked up at me and she said, are you okay? And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, well, of all my 20 years in medicine or in nursing, I have never seen anybody sit as still as you are. So I thought you had passed out. And I said, no, ma'am, I didn't. Because I just block out pain. Well, anyways, so fast forward, I'm in the tub. I'm trying to relax, get my body to relax, but this pain is just coming and coming. So then at this point, I started to feel like I had to use the restroom, that I had to go number 2. And so like I go and I sit down, and I'm sorry that this may be very graphic for y'all, but I want to explain and also encourage you that so that if you ever feel like this or you feel like something's uneasy, go seek medical help. Anyways, I go to the restroom. Nothing's happening. I'm kind of pushing, I'm kind of straining a little bit. Nothing's happening, but I still feel like I have to use the restroom. I feel it. I'm like, if I can go to the restroom, this pain will stop. Well, a few minutes later, I come out of the bath, and after I've tried to use the restroom, and I get back in the bath, and then I get out and I'm laying on the floor, and I just have this uncontrollable urge to just push. And I mean, I'm in the worst pain. I don't know what's going on. I'm texting my husband like, hey, you might need to come home. I think I need to go to the hospital. So then, like I said, I have this uncontrollable urge to push, and I just literally give it everything I got. And I remember looking down, and I'm looking down and I see a sack, this sack, and of water, of amniotic fluid, and Magdalene, my daughter, is floating in this fluid. And I just remember looking, and everything was like in slow motion at that point. And I just see her little hand, and she's very much alive, just there. And I guess I had also pushed out the placenta, like everything, like I don't know, it was all there, because I don't remember any more pain after that. I remember honestly thinking, oh my goodness, the pain is over, like there was no more pain. And at that point I had called my husband. I said, you need to get home now. I just had her. And everything after that was very, very fast. I do remember the ambulance arriving, them putting me on a stretcher. I don't know what happened to the baby at that point. I know that they did grab her, because that'll be later on in the story, but I don't know at that point what happened. I remember them taking me downstairs, putting me in the ambulance, and I just remember I was just kind of in shock. I know there were people talking to me. My husband was talking to me, but I don't know. I couldn't make out anything. I was just in this world of did that really just happen? So they end up taking me to the hospital in our town. Like I said before, we don't have an OBGYN department. And so I ended up having to go to the town over. They put me on the ambulance again, took me over. But before they took me over on the ambulance, I remember that I was very upset because they ended up giving me something. I don't know, it was something, but it completely calmed my nerves and everything. But I was upset and angry because I didn't want that. I was no longer in pain. I didn't need them to do that, and I didn't ask for it. And so I was upset. I know that they were just doing their jobs, but I wasn't in the, I wanted to, honestly, I wanted to feel everything. I wanted to feel the emotions. I wanted to feel, you know, if there was any pain, I still wanted to experience that because I didn't want to forget. And so I just felt like I was a little bit robbed of that. So at that point I was drugged up. I didn't feel anything emotionally. I wasn't able to cry. I was just kind of in this transit place. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like I was just very out of it. And so I'm riding on our way to, so it's about a 45-minute drive. And so I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, my husband is in another vehicle on the way to the hospital. So it was just me. And I'm just kind of in a la-la land. Like I said, at that point too, nothing was really making any sense. So I arrive at the hospital. They get me set up in my room. There's a nurse there. She's also a nurse that's on the grievance team. So she is specialized in helping women in child loss and pregnancy loss and things like that. And so she's sitting there, and she's also a Christian. I get emotional when I think about that particularly. Because I just see God's hand in every moment and in every step, that He didn't just leave me alone. He sent helpers. He sent other sisters. And at that time I wasn't a sister. So my nurse gets me set up. She gets me in my gown and everything. And I remember sitting there talking to her, and I just looked up at her, and I remember asking, "Is this my fault?" And she very gently said, "No, it's not your fault. There's nothing that you could have done. You had what's called a placenta abruption." And at that time, I didn't know what that was. But basically, what that is the placenta detaches from your uterus. So when you're pregnant, the placenta attaches to your uterus, and that is the blood supply that goes, and the nutrients and all of that goes to the baby through the umbilical cord. So basically what had happened was, because I was bleeding, the placenta was starting, so the blood was just basically trickling down and slowly but surely detaching the placenta from my uterus. So there was nothing physically that I could have done. And then she assured me that there was nothing that could have been done about our daughter. She was just barely 20 weeks. I had just turned 20 weeks. And at that time, a baby's eyes are fused shut. They are only able to be opened through utero, which means she would have had to continue to be in there for at least another 5 weeks, to be at least 4 to 5 weeks to have been available, been able to send to the children's hospital to be seen. So I was just shy of 20 weeks, and so there was nothing that could have been done. She would not have survived. Even if medical had been there, even if I had came in, there was nothing that they could have done. It was already in the process. It was already starting to happen. And so, like I said, I sit there and I'm talking to the nurse, and at that point, the medicine is starting to kind of wear off, and I'm able to kind of feel a little bit, but it's still not, I'm not all there. So I was just really in and out, mentally and emotionally. I was still trying to process. I was waiting on my husband to get there. So she gets me set up, and we go to the bed, and we're sitting there and we're talking, and she begins to explain her duties and her job as the grievance team. And she basically says, "Hey, I'm letting you know that when you feel comfortable, or if you feel comfortable, we do clean up the baby. We do take pictures of them, and we give them a teddy bear," and she had a bunch of other things she was saying. Like I said, at that point I was just kind of in and out, but I do remember her saying, "You have an opportunity to hold her, and we will get her cleaned up and we can bring her in." At that point, I was still waiting on my husband to come to the hospital. So I said, "Well, I'll talk to him, and we'll see." A little bit later, my husband shows up, and we finally get the opportunity. We talk it over, and we get the opportunity to hold her. It was a moment that I don't think I'll ever forget, and I am just extremely grateful and blessed that I got that opportunity, that I got to hold her. I have pictures of her. We have pictures in our home. We have a heart of her ashes. We just have memories still of her. She had all of her little fingers and toes. She actually looked a lot like my other children, and she was just so beautiful. And I just remember looking at her and being sad, being heartbroken, still questioning if there was anything that I could have done differently. Just so many thoughts were going through my head, so many things, so many questions, so many just possibilities, but also just this sense of, I'm not really sure how to explain it, but just this, it wasn't necessarily peace, but it was this sense that of gratefulness that I was getting to hold her. And then fast forward to that night, I remember sitting there in the dark. My husband was already asleep, and I just remember coming in and out, crying, just these deep, deep sobs of, I didn't know what to do. I would fall asleep and I would wake up. I would be upset at myself because, again, the medicine was still flowing through my body. It had really started to wear off in the middle of the night, and that was when the deep sobbing would come, and I would wake up and I would realize that I was in the hospital and that this was not a dream, that this was reality. And that morning, I actually woke up, and I just remember looking outside, and the sun was coming up, and I remember it like, I mean, it plays like a movie in my head. I just remember it so vividly. But I remember looking out the window, and we were a few stories up. So when I looked out the window, we were like at eye level of another building across the street. And across the street above this building was a cross. And I just remember the sun coming up behind this building, and I could see the cross so clearly. And not only could I visually see it, but it was like my eyes were finally opened. And in that moment, I just sat up in bed and I just started weeping and crying, like this uncontrollable cry. And this cry that was just coming out from my heart. And I just remember thinking and looking at the cross and saying, Lord, I'm tired. I'm weak. I'm tired of living like this, and I'm tired of doing it this way, and I'm tired of doing it my way, and I want to do it your way. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't have a practical for the days coming forward. I just knew that I was done living like this. I was tired of hurting so deeply like this. I was tired of my sin. I was tired, like I didn't even know that it was sin necessarily, but I just knew I was tired of feeling the way that I did. I was tired of putting all of my eggs in one basket when it came to men or drugs or alcohol. I was tired of being empty and just not finding satisfaction in any of these things. Just every time I would go and do something trying to fill this void in my life, it was just leaving me worse. It was just leaving me more unhappy. And I was ready for lasting joy. I was ready for a life that was going to give me life abundantly. Like I said, I still didn't know at that time what that meant. I just knew that the scripture, was true, that to come to me, and I will make, your burdens light. And I just knew it was all there, peace that surpassed all understanding. In that moment, I just felt this overwhelming sense of peace. I no longer felt like I was carrying this. Of course it still hurt. I'm not saying that it didn't hurt, but it felt like somebody had picked it up off of me and I no longer was carrying around this weight anymore. And at that moment, I didn't know, but that was the moment that I had really truly given my life to Christ. And so then everything after that, it's kind of like a whirlwind. But May 20th of 2017, I officially gave my life to the Lord. And my life has not been the same. There have been definitely rocky moments. There are definitely things where I have questioned my salvation, where I have questioned just all of these things. But ultimately, I know that my life was secured. My salvation was secured May 20th of 2017, and things have not been the same since. So the reason that I wanted to make this video is because my spiritual birthday is coming up this week, and I thought 5 years, wow, 5 years that I have been walking with the Lord. And of course, I look back over that 5 years and go, I should be further in my walk, or I should have more to share, or I should have this or that. But when I tell you that the Lord is good, the Lord is good. He has granted me peace in this area of losing my daughter. I know in my heart of hearts that He was there. He was walking through that time with me. He didn't leave me there. I know that He is good, and He is still worthy of praise. And I will never, ever forget the humbling experience, the way that He showed and revealed Himself to me. His attributes were on display, and I will forever, eternally be grateful. And I cannot wait to hug my Jesus and tell Him thank you for this extraordinary life and the life to come. All right, y'all. Thank y'all so much for allowing me to share my story. And although it has tears, and although it was a sad, not uplifting story, I pray that this does encourage you to be there for others, to come alongside other women who may be walking through this season, or maybe you are the woman walking through this season. And so I pray that you find comfort and peace, and that the Lord grants that to you, and that you know that He is still good, and He will always be good. And although we don't always know the purpose behind why He does the things He does, He is sovereign and He is in control. I will see y'all in the next episode. God bless y'all, and go and be a light out there.